April 18, 1906, 5:12 in the morning. Most of San Francisco is still asleep. The city of 400,000 people, the proudest, wealthiest city on the American West Coast, is quiet. The bay is still, the streets are empty. Then the ground moves. Not a rumble, not a warning, a violent, lurching snap that lasts 45 seconds and changes everything. Buildings crack, water mains burst, gas lines rupture, and in the silence that follows, before anyone fully understands what has happened, the fires begin. What follows over the next 3 days is one of the most complete destructions of a major American city in recorded history. Not just an earthquake, not just a fire, a total collapse of everything a modern city depends on: water, communication, order, infrastructure, all of it gone at once, leaving 400,000 people to face the consequences with nothing but each other. This is San Francisco, April 1906, and this is what it was actually like to be there. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what San Francisco was in 1906. This was not a frontier town. This was not a rough mining camp. By 1906, San Francisco was 50 years past the gold rush and had transformed itself into one of the great cities of the world. The waterfront was one of the busiest ports on the Pacific. Ships from Asia, South America, and Europe docked daily. Silk from Japan, sugar from Hawaii, lumber from the Pacific Northwest, all of it moved through San Francisco's wharves. The city was the financial capital of the American West, home to banks, insurance companies, and trading houses that controlled commerce from Alaska to Chile. The architecture matched the ambition. The Palace Hotel, opened in 1875, was considered one of the finest hotels in the world. 7 stories of marble and mahogany surrounding a glass-roofed central court. The new City Hall, completed in 1899, had a dome taller than the Capitol in Washington. Nob Hill was lined with the mansions of railroad barons, the Stanfords, the Crockers, the Hopkinses, monuments to the fortunes that had been made building the Transcontinental Railroad. Below Nob Hill, in the dense working-class neighborhoods south of Market Street, 200,000 people lived in wooden tenements, cheap boarding houses, and modest family homes. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, China, and Mexico, the labor force that kept the great city running. It was a city of enormous inequality and enormous energy, confident, loud, and completely unprepared for what April 18th would bring. The earthquake struck along the San Andreas Fault, a 296-mile rupture that scientists would later estimate produced energy equivalent to the largest nuclear weapons ever built. In San Francisco, the shaking lasted between 45 and 60 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but in those seconds, brick chimneys collapsed onto sleeping families. Gas pipes sheared apart underground. Water mains fractured across the entire city simultaneously. Buildings constructed on the artificial fill of the old bay, land that had been dumped into the water during the city's rapid expansion, liquefied and sank, taking everything built on top of them. The new City Hall, built at enormous expense over 27 years, collapsed almost entirely. The ornate dome survived, but stripped of its stone cladding by the shaking, it stood naked, a steel skeleton against the morning sky, the most visible symbol of what the earthquake had done to civic pride. South of Market Street, in the densely packed working-class neighborhoods, the destruction was catastrophic. Cheap construction, unstable ground, buildings packed tightly together, block after block of tenements collapsed, trapping people in the rubble before the fires came. The earthquake killed perhaps 700 people directly. The fires that followed would kill thousands more. Here is the terrible irony of San Francisco 1906. The earthquake alone might have been survivable. It was the fires that destroyed the city. Within an hour of the earthquake, smoke was visible rising from a dozen separate locations. Gas mains had ruptured throughout the city. Wood-framed buildings had collapsed onto open hearths and stoves where morning fires were already burning. In one notorious case, a woman cooking breakfast when the earthquake struck started what became known as the ham and eggs fire, a blaze that burned for 3 days and consumed much of the city's center. The fire department arrived quickly. They had equipment, they had organization, they had experience. What they did not have was water. Every major water main in the city had been broken by the earthquake. Fire hydrants produced nothing. The elaborate pressurized water system that a modern city depends on for fire suppression completely destroyed in the first 60 seconds. The fires burned unchecked. They moved through the wooden neighborhoods south of Market Street like water downhill. They crossed Market Street and began climbing toward Nob Hill. They jumped fire breaks and flared again in new locations. The decision was made to use dynamite. If fires couldn't be stopped with water, perhaps they could be contained by demolishing buildings in their path, creating gaps too wide to jump. City engineers, army officers, and fire chiefs began ordering buildings blown up across the city. The strategy worked, partially. It also destroyed buildings that might have survived, and in some cases, the dynamiting itself started new fires from ruptured gas lines. For 3 days, the fires burned. A column of smoke visible 100 miles away marked the location of what had been the most important city on the American Pacific coast. What happened to the 400,000 people inside this disaster? The first thing that strikes every account written by witnesses is the quiet. Not silence. There was the roar of fire, the crash of buildings, the distant sound of dynamite. But the human response was almost completely without panic. People walked. That is the dominant image of San Francisco 1906. Hundreds of thousands of people walking, out of their neighborhoods, away from the fires, toward the parks and hills and open spaces at the edges of the city, walking calmly, systematically, carrying what they could. Some carried nothing. Some pushed baby carriages loaded with household possessions. Some dragged trunks along the streets on improvised sleds. Families harnessed themselves to delivery wagons piled with everything they'd managed to grab in the minutes before they had to run. And they were, by every account, extraordinarily courteous to each other. People who had lost everything helped strangers carry their belongings. Wealthy families whose Nob Hill mansions were burning shared their remaining food with workers from south of Market. In the parks where tens of thousands camped, neighbors who had never spoken introduced themselves. Army tents went up, field kitchens appeared, lines formed, orderly, patient, quiet, for free meals. One man, standing on the steps of his Nob Hills home, watching 2 walls of fire advance from 2 different directions, told a reporter passing by, "Yesterday morning I was worth $600,000. This morning, this house is all I have left. It will go in 15 minutes." He was, the reporter noted, cool and cheerful and hospitable. That composure, that refusal to collapse, is one of the most documented features of San Francisco 1906. It surprised observers from around the world who had expected panic. What they found instead was a city of people who had lost almost everything and were already, quietly, figuring out what came next. When the fires were finally extinguished on Friday, April 20th, 3 days after the earthquake, the scale of what had happened became visible. 28,000 buildings destroyed, 500 city blocks reduced to rubble and ash, 3/4 of the city's housing gone. The financial district, the working-class neighborhoods, the waterfront warehouses, the grand hotels, the newspaper offices, the theaters, all of it either collapsed or burned. The death toll remains uncertain to this day. Official estimates at the time reported around 700 dead, a number later historians have concluded was deliberately kept low by city officials, anxious to reassure investors and prevent property values from collapsing. Modern estimates range from 3,000 to as many as 6,000 dead, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. 300,000 people were homeless. Refugee camps filled Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and every open space in the city. The largest camp held 20,000 people. The Army coordinated food distribution, water supply, and basic sanitation for a city that had ceased to function. The financial losses were staggering, estimated at $400 million in 1906 dollars, equivalent to tens of billions today. Insurance companies faced claims they could not pay. Many simply declared bankruptcy. Policyholders who had believed themselves protected found their policies worthless. San Francisco had been destroyed. The question was whether it would stay destroyed. It would not. Within days of the fires being extinguished, the rebuilding began. Not in months, not after careful planning, within days. San Francisco's business community, its political leaders, and its ordinary citizens made a collective decision with remarkable speed. This city would be rebuilt. It would be rebuilt fast, and it would be rebuilt as the great city it had been. The earthquake and fire were a catastrophe. They were not the end. Temporary structures appeared in the ruins almost immediately. Wooden shacks, canvas shelters, improvised shops set up on cleared lots where buildings had stood. Merchants who had lost their entire inventories set up tables in the open air and started selling whatever they could find or receive from outside. The pace of permanent reconstruction was extraordinary. Within 3 years, over 20,000 new buildings had been constructed. Within a decade, San Francisco had rebuilt almost completely, in many areas better than before, with improved construction standards, wider streets, and updated infrastructure. The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition, a World's Fair held in San Francisco to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal, served as the city's announcement to the world that it was back. 12 million visitors came. They found a city that showed almost no visible trace of the disaster that had leveled it 9 years before. The speed and completeness of San Francisco's recovery became one of the defining stories of American civic life in the early 20th century, a demonstration that a community, given sufficient will and cohesion, could absorb almost total destruction and rebuild.